I didn't set out to freeze an entire neighborhood. Honestly, if you'd asked me that morning what kind of day it was going to be, I would have told you it looked like any other Tuesday in the high country. Trucks warming up in the cold, diesel rumbling across the gravel lot, the smell of propane hanging faint in the air. By sunset, though, I'd already made the decision that would shut off the gas supply to 43 luxury homes sitting up on the ridge. And the strange part is, they did it to themselves. My name's Caleb Mercer. I'm 50 years old, and for almost 3 decades I've been in the propane business up in western Montana, just outside a little town called Redstone Valley. Not a big company, not some corporate outfit either, just a yard full of steel tanks for tanker trucks, a rusted office trailer that's seen better days, and a handful of guys who've been with me long enough to know where every valve and wrench is without asking. Propane work isn't glamorous. You haul fuel through snowstorms, mud, gravel roads that feel like they're trying to swallow your tires. Most days you're out before sunrise and home after dark, smelling like diesel and metal. But folks depend on you. Out here, propane isn't some luxury. It's heat, it's cooking, it's hot water in the middle of winter when the temperature drops below 20 and the wind starts cutting through the mountains like a knife. So yeah, when you run a propane route out here, people know your trucks. And that's where the trouble started. About 5 years ago, developers started building a place called Silver Ridge Estates just across the highway from my yard. Used to be open land, grazing pasture mostly. Then one summer the bulldozers rolled in, and within 2 years that whole hillside turned into something that looked like a ski resort brochure. Massive timber homes, heated driveways so snow melts before it can stick, outdoor stone fireplaces bigger than most people's living rooms, glass walls looking out at the mountains. 43 houses total when they finished. $1 million homes easy, some of them probably double that. Now I'll say this. I've got nothing against people with money. Folks can spend their cash however they want. But the kind of people who moved into Silver Ridge weren't the ranching type, weren't locals either. Most of them were second home buyers. Tech investors from Seattle. Finance guys from New York. One movie producer from Los Angeles who apparently flew in by private jet twice a year and thought that counted as living rural. And running the whole show was the Homeowners Association. The HOA president was a guy named Douglas Whitmore. Tall, silver hair, always dressed like he'd stepped out of some magazine ad for expensive watches. I later found out he managed some investment fund back east, though he worked remotely from one of those glass houses up on the ridge. Douglas had this voice, smooth, calm, the kind that sounded polite even when he was telling you something you didn't want to hear. At first, we got along just fine. Because here's the thing nobody told the new homeowners when they bought those houses. Silver Ridge didn't have natural gas. No pipeline anywhere near that valley. So every single one of those mansions ran on propane. Heating systems, ranges, outdoor fire pits, backup generators, all propane. And guess who supplied it? Me. Well, technically my company, Mercer Fuel Services. About 4 years before the trouble started, the developers had signed a service agreement with us. We installed a centralized propane tank farm down at the bottom of the ridge, big horizontal cylinders, 12,000 gallons total capacity, feeding distribution lines that ran underground to each house. Worked beautifully. We'd fill the tank farm every couple weeks in winter, maybe once a month in summer. Simple system. Never had a problem. Until the day they decided my trucks were ruining their peace and quiet. I remember that morning clear as day. Cold September air, sky bright blue, mountains already dusted with early snow. One of my drivers, Ray, was heading up to do a routine fill at the tank farm. About 15 minutes later, my phone rings. Ray's voice sounded confused. "Caleb, you might want to come down here." "What's going on?" "They won't let me through the gate." Now that didn't make sense. The tank farm sat just inside the entrance road to Silver Ridge, and we'd been driving that route for years. So I drove down there myself. Sure enough, sitting across the road was the security gate, brand new metal sign bolted beside it. And standing there with his arms crossed was one of the private security guards the HOA hired. Ray's truck idling behind him. I walked up and said, "Morning, what's the holdup?" The guard pointed to the sign. It read, "Commercial vehicles over 8,000 pounds prohibited. HOA safety regulation." I stared at it a moment. Then I looked back at him. "You're kidding." He shook his head. "Orders from the association, sir. Trucks like this can't enter the property anymore." Ray leaned out his window. "Well, that's a problem, because the propane tanks are literally right up that road. The guard shrugged like it wasn't his issue. About that time, a black SUV rolled up behind us. Out stepped Douglas Whitmore himself, hands in his coat pockets, expression calm like always. "Mr. Mercer," he said, smiling slightly. "I figured you'd show up." I said, "Doug, what is this?" He glanced at the trucks, then toward the hillside where those mansions sat glowing in the sunlight. "Silver Ridge is designed to be a quiet mountain retreat," he said. "The board recently voted to restrict heavy commercial traffic. The diesel noise, the vibration, it's not consistent with the environment we're trying to maintain." I blinked at him. "You realize those trucks deliver the propane your entire neighborhood runs on, right?" He nodded politely. "We're exploring alternative arrangements. Such as, for now," he said smoothly, "we simply can't allow vehicles over 8,000 pounds on the road." Ray let out a short laugh from the truck. "Buddy, this truck weighs 26,000 empty." Douglas ignored him. Instead, he handed me a sealed envelope. "Formal notice from the HOA," he said. "Beginning today, violations of the vehicle restriction will incur fines of $1,000 per day." Then he gave me that same polite smile again, turned around, and drove up the hill toward those glass mansions. Leaving my driver, my truck, and the propane tank farm sitting behind a gate we suddenly weren't allowed to pass. I stood there for a minute, staring at that sign. And I remember thinking, these people really have no idea how propane works, or how stubborn a man can get when someone tries to shut down the work he's built his whole life around. That night, I went back to the office, pulled every contract file we had on Silver Ridge, and started reading. And somewhere around midnight, I found something that changed everything. Around midnight that night, the office was quiet except for the little electric heater humming under my desk and the wind pushing against the metal siding of the trailer. I had 3 folders spread out in front of me. Original construction contracts, delivery schedules, county lease paperwork. I'd read through most of it twice already, mostly out of frustration more than anything. At that point, I was still trying to figure out how Douglas Whitmore thought he could block my trucks and somehow keep his neighborhood running on propane. Because propane doesn't magically appear. You have to deliver it. Simple as that. Then I got to a document I hadn't looked at in years, the original site lease agreement. Back when the development was first being built, the county required the propane storage facility to sit on a small parcel outside the residential lots for safety reasons. Too much fuel sitting too close to houses can cause problems if something ever goes wrong. So the developers had leased a half-acre utility parcel from the county, and they subleased that parcel to my company. Not the HOA, not the homeowners. Me. I remember leaning back in my chair and reading that paragraph 3 times just to be sure I wasn't misunderstanding it. The tank farm sat on land legally controlled by Mercer Fuel Services under a long-term county lease, which meant one very important thing. The propane tanks feeding Silver Ridge were my facility, my equipment, my access road, my gate. The HOA didn't own it. They just bought propane from it. And suddenly the situation looked a whole lot different. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who jumps straight to revenge. My dad raised me better than that. He always said business out here works on reputation more than contracts. You treat people fair, they treat you fair back. But that afternoon at the gate kept replaying in my head. The way Douglas talked about environmental ambience, the $1,000 daily fines, the smirk when he handed me that envelope. It wasn't about safety. It wasn't about pavement damage. It was about control. Some rich guy from out of state deciding my trucks didn't fit the view from his vacation house. And that's when something else clicked in my head. If my trucks couldn't drive their road, then they couldn't get propane. I checked the monitoring logs for the tank farm. The system was sitting at about 68% capacity, which sounds like a lot. But when 43 houses start pulling heat once winter hits, those tanks drain faster than most people think. Especially homes with heated driveways and outdoor fire pits running all night. At their average burn rate, those tanks had maybe 2.5 weeks of fuel left. Maybe less if the temperature dropped. I stared at those numbers for a long time. Then I got up, poured another cup of coffee, and started making a plan. 4 days later, I drove down to the county records office. Small place, 2 clerks, dusty filing cabinets, smell of old paper everywhere. I asked them to pull the parcel documents for the utility lot at Silver Ridge. They printed everything out. And there it was in black and white. County leaseholder, Mercer Fuel Services, LLC. Authorized access, contractor personnel, and equipment only. Control of infrastructure, Mercer Fuel Services. I folded the papers, slid them into a folder, and drove back to the yard feeling calmer than I had all week. Because now I knew exactly what I was dealing with. The next morning, I loaded a toolbox into my pickup and drove out to the tank farm. The entrance sat just past the HOA gate, gravel road running down into a fenced compound where the storage tanks rested like giant silver submarines in the dirt. Two of my guys, Ray and Miguel, were already there. Ray looked over when I pulled up. "Thought we weren't allowed in here anymore," he said. I held up the lease paperwork. "They don't own this land." Miguel raised his eyebrows. "Oh." Inside the compound, the tanks hummed quietly, pressure gauges ticking along like they always had. Everything working perfectly, which made what I was about to do feel a little strange. I walked over to the main distribution manifold, the central pipe feeding propane from the tanks into the underground lines that ran uphill to the houses. Then I installed something that technically should have been there from the beginning. A master shutoff valve. Heavy brass, industrial grade. Took about 20 minutes. Ray watched me the whole time. Finally, he said, "Caleb, you're not thinking what I think you're thinking, are you?" I tightened the last bolt and wiped my hands on a rag. "Those houses burn about 600 gallons a day once winter kicks in." Miguel whistled quietly. Ray crossed his arms. "Man, that neighborhood's gonna run dry." I didn't answer. Instead, I walked to the gate of the tank farm and threaded a thick steel chain through the bars. Then I snapped on a big industrial padlock. Next, I mounted 3 small security cameras on fence posts facing the road. And finally, I bolted a sign to the gate. "Private contractor property. Authorized access only." Ray read the sign, then looked back at me. "This is going to get interesting." That afternoon, I sat down at my desk and wrote a short email. Professional. Straight to the point. Due to access restrictions placed on Mercer Fuel Services vehicles by the Silver Ridge Homeowners Association, propane delivery service is temporarily suspended until unrestricted access to the tank farm and distribution infrastructure is restored. I attached copies of the lease agreement and sent it to Douglas Whitmore and every HOA board member. Then I waited. The call came on day 7. I could hear tension in Douglas's voice immediately. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "there appears to be a misunderstanding." I leaned back in my chair. "Oh, our residents are reporting a reduction in propane pressure," he said carefully. "You've restricted access to the tank facility." "That's correct. You cannot shut off essential utilities to 43 homes." I glanced at the monitoring dashboard on my computer. "Tank level, 52%. "I haven't shut anything off," I said. "Your neighborhood still has propane." "For now." "Well, that depends." "On what?" "Access," I said calmly. "Your HOA banned my trucks from the road. Without delivery access, the tanks eventually run empty." There was a long pause on the line. Then Douglas said quietly, "Are you threatening the association?" "No, sir," I replied. "Just explaining how propane works." Another pause. Finally, he asked, "How long do we have?" I checked the burn rate estimates again. "At current usage?" I said. "About 11 days." The silence after that felt heavier. "You're placing families at risk," he said. "Your policy did that," I replied. And I hung up. By day 9, word had spread through Silver Ridge. One of the homeowners stopped by my yard that afternoon. Older guy named Franklin, retired surgeon from Chicago. He stepped out of a Range Rover looking nervous. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "is it true our gas supply might run out?" I shrugged slightly. "Depends how long your HOA keeps my trucks off the road." He ran a hand through his gray hair. "My wife says the fireplaces already aren't burning as strong." I didn't say anything. He stood there another minute. Then he sighed and drove back toward the ridge. That evening, I checked the tank monitor again. 41%. And the forecast for the next week showed temperatures dropping into the teens. Right about then, I started drafting something new. Not a threat. A service agreement. Because if Silver Ridge wanted propane, they were going to need a new understanding about how my trucks moved through their quiet little paradise. And by the time I finished writing it, the numbers on that contract were going to make Douglas Whitmore's $1,000 fines look like pocket change. By the time I finished drafting that new service agreement, it was close to 2 in the morning. The office heater had clicked off, and the room had that cold metal feeling trailers get when the mountain air pushes in through the seams. I sat there staring at the numbers on the page for a long time, not because I was unsure, but because I knew once I sent it, there was no walking it back. This wasn't just a bill. It was leverage. And I don't like using leverage unless someone leaves me no choice. But Douglas Whitmore had made his position pretty clear. My trucks ruined his view of a peaceful mountain retreat. So if my trucks were going to drive through that neighborhood again, it was going to come with terms that made sure nobody tried that stunt twice. I printed the document, read it one more time, then emailed it to the HOA board. Subject line simple. Updated propane service agreement, Silver Ridge Estates. Then I went home and slept like a rock. The next morning, the temperature outside my kitchen window was 19 degrees. Winter had arrived early that year, and propane burns fast when cold air starts pressing down from the mountains. Around noon, I checked the tank monitoring system. Propane level, 34%, which meant the clock was officially ticking. Now here's something a lot of people don't realize about propane systems like that one. Once the tank drops low enough, pressure starts falling too. Furnaces struggle, flames get weaker, water heaters take longer to heat. You don't run out instantly. You feel it slowly, like the system is getting tired. And by day 12, that's exactly what started happening up on Silver Ridge. The first phone call came from a homeowner named Linda Matthews. Her voice sounded frustrated but polite. "Mr. Mercer, our kitchen range keeps sputtering. The flame won't stay strong." I told her the same thing I told everyone else. "The tank farm hasn't been refilled. Your HOA board controls whether my trucks can access the property." There was a pause. Then she said quietly, "Douglas told us the situation was under control." I didn't respond, because sometimes silence makes the truth clearer than words. That afternoon, I drove up the county road that overlooks the ridge. From there, you can see the whole development spread across the hillside. Huge houses, smoke drifting from a few fireplaces, snow beginning to settle on the roofs. Beautiful place. But beauty doesn't keep furnaces running. By day 16, the temperature dropped to 15 degrees overnight. I checked the tank system first thing that morning. Propane level, 22%. That's when the second call came. This time it was Douglas Whitmore. His voice was tighter now, less polished than usual. "Mr. Mercer, we received your proposed agreement." I leaned back in my chair. "Good. You're asking each household to pay $3,400 annually for delivery access." "That's correct. That totals nearly $1.4 million across the community." "Yes." He let out a quiet breath. "And the contract term is 20 years. "That's also correct." Silence hung on the line. Finally, he said what I knew he'd say. "This looks like ransom." I chuckled softly. "No, Douglas. Ransom is when someone takes something that belongs to you." Another pause. Then I said, "This is a service agreement." His tone hardened slightly. "You're exploiting a temporary dispute." I looked at the monitor again. 21%. "You blocked the trucks that deliver your fuel," I said. "That wasn't temporary. That was policy." Another long silence. Then he asked quietly, "What happens if we decline?" I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. Then eventually the propane tanks reached zero. He didn't respond, but I could practically hear the calculations running through his head. 43 houses. 43 angry homeowners. Families who paid millions for mountain comfort, suddenly wearing winter coats inside their own kitchens. And the one thing they all had in common was the man who told them diesel trucks were ruining the ambience. Douglas Whitmore. By day 18, the panic was impossible to hide. Ray told me one of the Silver Ridge residents had driven past the yard that morning and just sat there watching the tanker trucks for a while, like a thirsty man staring at a well. Around noon, 2 SUVs rolled into the gravel lot. Douglas stepped out of the first one. 3 other HOA board members climbed out behind him. They looked tired, cold, and a little embarrassed. Douglas walked up to the office door where I was standing. "Mr. Mercer," he said. No smile this time. Just a tired businessman who realized the ground had shifted under his feet. "We're prepared to discuss your proposal." I nodded toward the office. "Coffee?" He hesitated, then nodded. Inside the trailer, the heater hummed, and the smell of diesel drifted faint through the walls. Ray and Miguel pretended to work on paperwork in the corner, though I could tell they were listening. Douglas sat across the desk from me. One of the board members slid a folder forward. "The association is willing to sign," Douglas said. "But we have conditions." I opened the folder slowly. "Let's hear them." "Immediate propane delivery once the contract is executed." "That's already in the agreement." He nodded. "And we require confirmation that your trucks will operate during reasonable hours." I smiled slightly. "My drivers start early in winter. But they're professionals." He glanced down at the document again. Then he said something quieter. The board will also remove the commercial vehicle restriction. I raised an eyebrow. Permanently. He nodded once. Permanently. Now that was interesting. Because when people realize they've lost control, they usually try to negotiate the smallest amount possible. But Douglas had done the math, and he knew the residents of Silver Ridge were already turning on him. So he kept going. The association will also reimburse Mercer Fuel Services for lost operational time, $23,800. Ray almost choked on his coffee behind me. I kept my face neutral. Then I added one more page to the agreement. Douglas looked at it. A written apology from the HOA board acknowledging the service disruption, I said calmly. He stared at me. For a second I thought he might refuse. Then he picked up the pen. Signed. One by one, the rest of the board members followed. When the last signature dried, Douglas pushed the document across the desk. Payment will be wired by 1 p.m. today. I stood up and offered my hand. He shook it. Firm grip, but the confidence from that day at the gate was gone. Before leaving, he paused at the door. You made your point, he said quietly. I shrugged. You made it first. They drove away a few minutes later. At exactly 1:15 that afternoon, the wire transfer confirmation popped up on my computer. I grabbed my coat, walked out to the truck, and drove down to the tank farm. The wind was stronger now, snow blowing sideways across the field. I unlocked the chain from the gate, walked over to the distribution manifold, and slowly turned the master valve open. The gauges ticked upward as propane flowed back through the system. Pressure returning, heat returning, life returning to those houses up on the ridge. The next morning, our tanker trucks rolled through the Silver Ridge entrance again. No guard stopping us. No signs about vehicle weight. Just the low rumble of diesel engines climbing the road past those million-dollar homes. Every Tuesday since then, my trucks make that same delivery. And funny thing is, no one in Silver Ridge complains about the noise anymore. Not Douglas Whitmore. Not the HOA. Not even the guy with the glass mansion overlooking the valley. Because once you understand how the system works, you tend to respect the people who keep it running. Now here's the part I'm curious about. Some folks who hear this story say, I went too far, that shutting off access to the propane tanks forced those homeowners into signing a deal they didn't want. Others say the HOA tried to bully a local business and just didn't expect someone to push back. So I'll ask you the same question people keep asking me. Did I charge a fair price for access to my trucks? Or should I have charged a whole lot more? Let me know what you think. Drop your opinion in the comments, because stories like this always split people right down the middle, and honestly, I'm still curious where most folks land on it.